I keep having conversations with people where the recurrent theme is there's too much regulation, it's too invasive, it's too prescriptive, it's too hard. I'm not ever going to argue with the fact that regulation is hard. It is. By any measure, the regulation that's coming online in Europe and the UK, it's tough. But with that said, I actually have a question, and it's not a rhetorical one, it's a genuine wondering, and if anybody out there has thoughts they'd like to share, the comments are open. I'd love to hear from you. Here's what I'm thinking about. We've got at one end of the spectrum, the people who are saying too much regulation, too hard, too prescriptive, it's getting in the way of us doing business. And then at the other end, there's going to be more of a laissez-faire approach, right? A reliance on firms managing their own risk, doing the right thing according to their risk appetite. And in between the two, there's this space. Now, in Europe, big focus on regulation, so Europe, EU plus UK, and in the US, just to name another region, big focus on operational resilience, big focus on the security of critical infrastructure, but more of an urging coming from the public authorities. You could say that there is more of a stick in Europe and possibly more of an urging, benevolent hand in the US. Now, it's going to be really interesting is seeing which of these approaches is more effective in delivering target outcomes, because the outcomes that everybody is looking for are by and large the same. Now, what I'm wondering about is which of these approaches is more appropriate. And here's how and why I'm thinking about that. I'm in the middle of preparing my C-risk certification from ISACA, and in reviewing the material from ISACA, it struck me that if every firm was following the recommendations for information security and risk management coming from ISACA, to name but one, right? It's not to say that ISACA holds the truth. But if you were to leverage that body of knowledge, and if you were to leverage publications coming from SANS and from world-renowned institutions like NIST, and then other bodies of knowledge, SABSA would be a personal favorite of mine, it'd be in great shape. You really would. Like if you were applying what those recommendations are, and if all of that best practice was in place, wow, you'd really be in good shape. And yet none of that is regulation. We know what good looks like, and yet is it being applied? I just want to give you an example of something that really got me thinking about this. I came across a publication coming from the Cyber Safety Review Board, and it roasts a technology provider. Now, I'm not interested in naming and shaming the technology provider. You'll be able to find it really easily. But what I'm interested in is the fact that after rigorous fact finding, there are some findings that I am sure are not alone in this particular provider. It talks about, for example, a cascade of avoidable errors, a failure to detect the compromise of its cryptographic crown jewels, a failure to maintain security controls that other providers had, a decision to not correct in a timely manner inaccurate public statements, a problem with culture. And this is what I'm wondering, right? The people who are saying that there is too much regulation, the people who are saying that the regulation is too prescriptive and too invasive, if that's one end of the spectrum and people are saying that that's not desirable, and yet at the other end of the spectrum we have this voluntaristic approach based on self-enlightenment and a firm's decision to do the right thing, what happens when firms don't do the right thing? What happens when best practice doesn't get applied? And what happens when the risk appetite of the firm arguably will cause wide collateral damage to external stakeholder groups who have no real means of protecting themselves? That's going to be the case for customers in the private sector, in the real economy, users of critical infrastructure. There's another publication that I found edifying coming from CISA, where they talk about a red teaming exercise where Network defenders from the critical infrastructure entity had previously identified and reported the vulnerability but did not remediate it. What happened was that the management of that entity underestimated the level of risk posed and basically said, you know what, we're deprioritizing the treatment of that vulnerability because even though our own cybersecurity team has identified it, in our risk-based decision making, miscalculated the likelihood and the impact. What do we do with this? If regulation is too tough, but the best practice isn't being applied, in between those two extremities, there is a space. And I am genuinely asking, what could be the alternative? Comments are open, please share.